Hello, and you're listening to the Zone of Hot Truth, a podcast where we talk about our experiences, opinions, and hot takes as new DMs in 15 minutes or less. I'm Kevin.
I'm Eric, and I just got my legs shredded by my cat in the pre-session clap.
You may or may not have heard these sounds.
I'm John, and all of my blood is still inside of my body for now.
I'm Grant, and I feel no sympathy for Eric.
Oh my god. Okay, and so today we are actually going to be doing a special Halloween thing and talking about how, well, not how, but can you use D&D as a means to strike fear in your players. So, what do we think? Is that something that's possible given the scope of D&D and its mechanics, or is that just completely off the table?
Emphatic no from me. So we've talked about this before in previous podcasts. D&D is about playing a superhero, which it's a power trip oftentimes, where you are given so much power and energy, and to be able to threaten that character is very challenging. You can make the encounter very hard, but then you're just killing them in 2 shots, and that's not interesting. That's not scary. That's deadly. That's not scary. Or you can work on long-term dread and suspense, but I think there's better systems and ways of doing it than 5e.
So I'm just going to get my take out of the way, because it's very similar to John's. I don't think you can, but I think you can leverage your tools as a DM to ramp up the suspension tension and emulate horror. But I think that's about as good as you can do. Just emulating and just hoping to achieve that.
Tension's not horror, which is an important thing to say.
I don't think it's the superhero element that you mentioned, John. I don't think that's what actually fails to create the horror. I think it's the fact that whenever a problem is presented, 5th edition incentivizes people to look down at their character sheets and solve it by saying, "Hey, can I get a perception check on that? My passive perception is 50. And it's like, okay, well, no, the monster's like invisible. You can't see it. Well, invisibility in the DMG stands for this. There are so many rules and systems all baked around it as a combat and social and travel system. It is not baked in as a scare your players, terrify your players.
That's why I have my viewpoint, and that's why I said tension and suspense, which I know aren't horror, because it's the only way you can try to keep players from looking down at their sheet if you can just capture their engagement. But again, it's not true horror, which is why I think the answer is no. Okay. But it's because of what Eric just said.
So, what I will say is I agree with everything here that D&D is very much a system that is built on you feeling powerful, right? And that being taken away will often cause a sense of aggression. Here's what I'll say. I think you can, but it requires, in the same sense as you watching a horror movie, a sense of buy-in from the player, right? If you go in with a scenario that says, okay, this is something that's going to be scary, here's going to be what's going to be happening, need your buy-in into the atmosphere, let yourself channel like the music that is there, everything that is happening in the scene. Think of that like as you experiencing a horror movie, right? If you go into a horror movie and you're like, oh well, this is fine, and you just kind of laugh at everything, it's going to completely remove that experience. But if you come into there with that, I think that is something you can probably do, because I think most RPGs can do that. The systems might take away from that to some extent, but I think that also can be curtailed in certain ways.
I think at that point though, you're kind of struggling to like swim upstream. You're fighting against all the rule systems that are telling you look down, to look at your spells. So, do you think that attempting to run a horror scenario in 5th edition is something that DMs should do, or should they immediately think, well, let's attempt to do this in one of the many other systems such as Dread, 10 Candles, I can go on.
I was just about to throw those out.
That actually curtail themselves to that.
Those are all better systems for this. What I will say is I don't think there's any module on the market, or for at least for D&D, that is marketed as horror that any DM can use to convey the sense of scaring their players, right? And to go back to the main question.
Well, but like Curse of Strahd is advertised as gothic horror in a box.
But it is not intended to scare a player. It is intended to provide the horror imagery. But I think if you go in, if you construct a module such that you are fighting like some eldritch entity, right? Or like suddenly your ability to combat this thing is not there. you're left to your wits and like what's around you. I think then you might be able to, but it always is going to require a sense of buy-in. You can't just go in, beer and pretzels it like D&D is meant to be. So you are swimming upstream, and I think in that manner.
Which is why I think it's so hard to do, and why my gut reaction is to say no. And at the very least, like, you should probably expect to maybe fail the first 1 or 2 times you try to do it, and you shouldn't let that discourage you. But it's probably the hardest thing to attempt to do in D&D, is turn it into a horror game. Like,
that's
pure
can of worms. What's the hardest thing to do in D&D?
Can of worms, yeah.
Good. That's a fast call on that. So really quickly. So I think what I'll say. Oh man, I lose my train of thought. Balls. It just disappeared into the wind. Are you kidding me? Oh no. All right. So, okay. So I'll go into my next thought. Man, it was a good thought and I lost it. So the next thing I'll talk about too is I think I remembered it. Oh, look at me.
Yay.
It's fine. We'll cut all this out in post.
What I have said is I have not seen it personally, like it done. Right, like in any of the media I've consumed that is related to D&D, in any of the things I've read, in my experience as a player, I have not been put in a sense of fear. I put in a sense of like I worry. I think it's closer to that, and I think that's where things tend to fall with that.
I think one thing that if you're able to successfully do it, one thing that you need to try to hone in on is you can't scare the players' characters.
Yeah, that's
something you have to keep in mind. A player's character fears nothing. They can have a player role-playing that character feeling fear, but the player themselves is not going to. One thing that you are going to have to do is put things in front of players that scare them personally, and then they can really put themselves in the shoes of what their character is going through. Showing them the spiders crawling up their characters when they're in a tight box. That would terrify me personally, and I'm going to live that in my character.
So a thing to point out about this is I have experienced that. I've been on the receiving end of this from you, and it's incredibly slippery slope. In a game that we were playing, we were crawling through a very narrow tunnel, and
shout out quickly to Veins of the Earth, an OSR system that I was able to steal that from.
Thank you for that wonderful interruption.
We're going to tally this up.
Oh, yeah. And take a shot every time Eric mentions OSR. Anyway,
we'd be drunk.
So, we were crawling through very, narrow passages, and I, the player, John, has claustrophobia. So, that became instantly unnerving, and, I had to ask Eric to... all right, let's skip along with this, because we hit the personal boundary. So you can say, oh yeah, be scary to the players, but that's a dangerous territory. Yeah.
I think
total can of worms is
can of worms it.
Player safety.
Yep, real quick is that I will say is I think that is a consideration. You are completely correct. That needs to be taken into consideration because you might know that there's something really bothers somebody. What I will say regarding that, really quickly, not regarding that, but just in general, I think there's also a special kind of player, which I don't think I've seen very often. I don't think I've done it to any extent, but similar in the way you read a novel and you start to feel the feelings of the character you're reading, there are certain players who are so in tune with their character, they imagine their character walking into the building, and seeing the things that are horrific, and they get that chill, that sense of fear. I do think that's out there, but that is something that is also rare. And also, again, I'm going to keep beating that drum that requires a sense of a different kind of buy-in, but still buy-in nonetheless.
Also, another issue I think that we haven't touched on is even thinking about horror movies. Like, what's terrifying to one person isn't always terrifying to another. And D&D is a group experience, so trying to simultaneously find something that will scare 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players is going to be hard to do. It's easy to scare one person, or at least easier, but it's really hard to scare 5 people at the same time when they all have different fears, different interests.
That's true.
That's a big barrier.
So a thing about that to note is fear is a little bit of an echo chamber when you have the buy-off like Kevin is talking about. There's a reason why people prefer to go and watch horror movies in a movie theater sometimes, is because of the group atmosphere of it. It's the
Fear
somebody's
juice.
yes, the somebody screaming and then you reacting to that. Yes, you can't scare all of the players at once, but all players' fear amplifies other players' fear. So that's kind of correct, but kind of wrong.
I think you're right. And you want to try to set the trappings of that. So a movie theater, going to a movie, like what you said, both you said, is that the movie theater kind of signals to people, I should be feeling the feeling of fear. Playing a game of D&D around a campfire, as if it is a ghost story. That sets people up. It primes them to be in a position to feel the feeling you're trying to target, which is fear, horror.
Enter Ravenloft and play in a Gothic castle.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
The first time I hear something down a tunnel, like, that's gonna be sick. Like, or down a tunnel, in a different room.
Oh man, that's a can of worms. But I really wanted to try like a scary D&D or something like that in Hot Place and see what that looks like. To see if that actually generates that feeling. Yeah,
there is actually an experience where you can. I forget where it is. It's like Scotland or Ireland, where you can pay to play Dungeons and Dragons in a haunted. I'm using air quotes for the audio, but.
Thank you.
A haunted castle.
So great, we found the solution, because that sounds terrifying, and I love being scared, so that's the solution. Just buy a castle in Scotland.
But wouldn't you want to play 10 Candles there more? Or Dread? As far as, like, if you're actually going to really try to emulate these feelings, is play a system that's going to draw that out even more.
Yeah.
We always want data points.
Playing in a system that, like, inherently has this built in makes it so much easier. Like
Pathfinder.
You're the boy. We're not gonna make any Pathfinder friends on this podcast. There are systems with this already built in that make this way easier. Like Erica talked about 10 Candles and Dread. The mechanics of that totally just instantly are set up to build on fear. On Dread, there is the constant tension of the tower. Every single move is this the one? I don't know. 10 Candles, you know that those candles are going to burn out, and then it's just you alone in the dark. And those are powerful. It makes it way easier to get the buy-in that you're talking about, Kevin.
I agree, John. Yeah, but I'm gonna have to say.
Aw.
That we're coming
so
on to the final minutes of this.
So close. No.
So
almost.
Why don't we go ahead and just kind of go through? I think you've mentioned some good systems, but let's go back and see. This question, can we use D&D to scare our players? What do we think? What are our final answers and thoughts on that?
Yes, but not 5th edition. Kevin, for example, ran Knave in Death Frost Doom, and that was the only time as a player I felt that kind of total immersion, total buy-in, and again, roll light.
I was there for that, and I agree. I was actually scared. And to close off on the D&D point, I want it to be possible, but I just don't quite think it is. You can try, though, but you might fail, and you shouldn't be upset.
You probably will fail.
You probably will, though.
You're going to fail. This is Dark Souls. You're going to die. So why not make it easier on yourself and play something that's actually made for this?
And what I'll end with is, I think you can. It'll require buy-in and probably extra work that you probably use a different system for. But it is possible. I think it just requires a little bit of extra work. And I think with that, if you want to reach out to us, you can go to our zoneofhottruth@gmail.com and leave us a pretty little message. Probably find us on Twitter as well. I will have somebody quickly insert the thing here. This is where this is going to go. Somebody can quickly edit that.
At Zone of Hot Truth.
Oh my God.
Boom. Done. At Zone of Hot Truth.
There it is. There we go. And the last thing I'll have for you is keep rolling those dice.